Hello, right, we are live. So welcome to Sarah's first live stream, is that right?
First live stream, yes. I did a podcast
Yeah.
recently, but this is the first live one, yeah.
Although she's had a career in presenting, which we were just touching on as well. So we're going to talk about ADHD and financial decision making. But first of all, I just want to ask Sarah a bit more about her journey, really, and how you got to this point in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my background, as we were just saying, Bella, is in training development, leadership, management development, and I started my career on the railway, and I've been in general management positions, but I think the focus on it has always been around people. I enjoy being with people. I enjoy finding out about people, irrespective of who they are, and in terms of moving, I knew I'd do this. So thread, lose track. So I'm demonstrating some of my ADHD symptoms for you here, Bella. So the route to it, I've had quite an interesting, varied career. So as I say, started off in general management, moved into leadership development. I've lived abroad, which was great. Again, it was really varied, lots of interesting things to learn. That's right, yeah. And then I moved back to the UK and decided it was time to go back into full-time employment, because I hadn't been doing that for a while. I'd been self-employed. And I went back onto the railway, and you know, for me, it's a values-led organisation. It's meaningful, it matters, and I loved being part of it again. And I was coming up to 50. So children were still young teens or coming up to teens, typical sandwich generation. My parents are elderly. And I decided to start working full time, as you do. And it went really well at first. And then gradually, as the pressure sort of built up, so it wasn't just delivering, it was handling calls, dealing with children's challenges, dealing with parents' challenges. I found I was getting more and more anxious, and went to the doctor. They said, well, probably anxiety, probably menopause. So tick those two things off. But it still didn't seem to be helping. And during lockdown, I spotted ADHD in my son. And as I think a lot of us do, I think you can probably relate to this, Bella, that you see it in your child and then start thinking, oh my God, there's a description of me here. What's going on?
Yeah, apples and trees. Yeah, we were just having this conversation off air as such, that my son's being monitored for ADHD at school. So,
yeah, there seems to be a strong suggestion that it's genetic. So if you've got it, your children are likely to have it, or it's likely to be in the family. And so I was diagnosed, but what was interesting is that I started medication, which can be quite a challenge in itself, and that was all. So it was a case of, right, well, I'm medicated now, so maybe that's the silver bullet. We're okay now.
Oh, okay, but it wasn't necessarily sort of therapies and support for you.
No.
Right.
No. Okay. And bear in mind, I was fortunate enough to be able to go through a private diagnosis for myself and my children. It took 4 years to get us all into the NHS. Now, for me, that's perhaps, you could say, is that a big deal? I don't know. I know for some people with ADHD, there's very high suicide risks with people with ADHD. Right. It has a massive impact on people's mental health. And I know we'll come on to this, but I think often with women, it can be, especially menopausal women, it can be missed. It can be perhaps seen as anxiety or the menopause. And there's quite a lot of overlap, so it becomes quite complex to tease out.
The menopause can be complex, can't it, in the stages and how it presents and things like that. Exactly. Things overlaying. Yeah. So this was your journey, really. Then was that you realised that you had ADHD, you were diagnosed, and then that led you on your career path, really, into coaching.
Absolutely. I think I realised what was really interesting is that I got to a stage with work because my dad was seriously ill, end of life, and one of my children was having real mental health issues. I got to the stage where trying hard just didn't work anymore, and I recognise now when I look back, I pretty much burnt out. And what was really interesting is that when I left work, I was helping find support for my dad in terms of his dementia, care at home. It was incredibly emotional, incredibly intense. And I'd gone from basically thinking I was crap at work, my self-esteem had hit rock bottom, to realising that actually in this medical environment, when I'm pulling everything together for something that really matters to me, I was blooming brilliant. I get buy-in from people, find out, deal with an ever-changing situation, think ahead. So that was quite almost one of these sort of, oh, that's interesting. So when I'm in the right environment, then I'm thriving. So that was a real sort of, aha moment that it works when the circumstances are right.
So did you feel that then the coaching was the right environment for you, given what you've said about your role in presenting at Network? Sorry, not presenting. You were developing senior management at Network Rail, which involved a lot of presenting.
So facilitating. So
that's like the overlap of your skills, basically.
Yeah, because not only is it when you're facilitating, in effect, you're coaching, you're pulling information out of people, you're helping people see things differently. And in fact, when I was in France years ago, I did my coaching qualification and worked as a coach there for a little while. I had sort of mini careers out there teaching English, working as a coach. So it's, and as you and I were just saying, that sort of lifelong interest in psychology and neuroscience and what makes people tick, I think, all sort of came together.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. And that, so it's come together to your journey to here now. And I'm really interested, obviously, because I'm a financial advisor and I deal with a lot of people who are successful and by layman's terms, in my view, are potentially neurodiverse. Some diagnosed, some not, some want to be diagnosed, some don't care, happy to carry on as they are. But how do you feel it affects financial decision making?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I think before I answer that, it's worth, and remind me about it because I'll probably forget, it's worth thinking about what's going on with ADHD itself. So ADHD is some sort of lack of dopamine. And I say some sort of lack because I think as every month goes by, we learn more and more about how the brain works. And as I said to you before, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a neuroscientist. But there seems to be, if you think of it as a neurotypical brain has a sort of baseline of dopamine. And it's a certain level, so that doing things triggers a bit of dopamine. So typical things might be a reward, or a consequence, or praise, that sort of thing, or the importance of something. For neurotypical brains, that registers as, okay, I need to get on with that. When brains are lacking in dopamine, all of this sort of consequences, rewards, or it's important isn't enough to raise the level up to, okay, I'll get on with it. Because there's a link between dopamine and our prefrontal cortex, which is all about the planning, prioritizing, keeping our emotions in check, which when we talk about finances again, we can come back to.
Finances. So then you get the impulsivity that we relate to.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was talking to somebody recently, and she's fairly sure that her partner he's in the fire service. Fairly sure he has ADHD, as are a lot of people in the blue light services. Because
interesting, looking for the excitement sort of thing.
Looking for the excitement. And interestingly, so you think of that, dopamine goes up because things are really exciting. Suddenly it kicks in and you've got that laser-like focus. Plus, you've got qualities like wanting to make a difference, seeing lots of different things at a time. So we were talking about the hunter-gatherer, the idea that in prehistoric times, ADHD brains were very good as hunters because we would see danger, we'd see possibility. We wouldn't just be looking at one thing, we'd be sort of scanning the horizon and seeing the whole thing. So if you imagine somebody in the blue light services who has that ability to not just focus on one thing, but it's almost having the peripheral vision of, hang on, what's going on over there, sort of in my line of sight, talking to you, but something's happening there. And it's an incredible skill and ability to have. The problem is that we need a lot of dopamine for that to come online often. And ADHD brains have an interest-based motivation system. They're motivated by interest and passion. So when you find something interesting, so getting back to what you were saying about finances, if you're a bit bored, and so this friend of mine was saying her partner was quite embarrassed that he'd run up quite big bills buying guitars online. And he'd started doing more of it when his job had changed. So before, there was a lot more activity, and the job that he'd moved to was more sedentary.
So it would potentially apply, if people are over 18 in this country, they're perfectly entitled to gamble, for example.
That's right, exactly.
If they haven't had an awareness. And then, my husband goes to the races once a year to Cheltenham and takes £100. And when his rule is when it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
But if you didn't know your own brain and, didn't know about ADHD and things like that, then that could really catch you out from a financial point of view, as it could in other areas of finance. It's really interesting, actually. Before you even bring ADHD into it, we talk a lot about emotions and finance. And I believe, that there is very much a direct link. I mean, when I have no interest in cars, but when I'm not feeling quite right, I start looking at cars and think to myself, oh, I could do that, or I could do that, and then I'd have that car. And then I sort of step away and think to myself, but I'm not interested in cars. I have one that goes and it's up to date with its servicing and everything. And, when I stop and think, I think, no, I don't need the car.
Absolutely. And I think it's that stopping and thinking. Self-awareness is a huge part. And as I was saying before, that it's one thing having the medication, but I think the medication is a really useful support to help you start noticing patterns and self-awareness, which can be, you think, okay, so that's a trigger, or that's happening there. What can I put in place to actually help that? So it might be something as simple as, taking your PayPal off you. If you know that you've got a tendency to, last thing at night, PayPal or Etsy or whatever it is, eBay, because they don't look like very large amounts, but when it's so easy to pay, things like that can just perhaps put that space. So you've got that thinking, because I think we self-soothe. We've got a lot of ways of almost feeling better. And, there are all the classics. You were talking about addiction, smoking, drinking, shopping, gambling, sex addiction, risk taking. There's a terrifying number of high percentage of people with ADHD in prisons.
Yes, I have heard that, most definitely. Yeah. And I think there's so many other things that people can do as well. We were talking about technology as well, setting a reminder on your phone as to when your credit card bill needs paying, or 2 reminders, because you might ignore the first one, and it's an important thing to do. And certainly technology has helped me massively in terms of remembering things, and not being afraid to have, different color Post-it notes, and just have a system. Don't worry about what the system is. If the system works for you, have a system.
I've got a good example of that, actually, in that I decided, probably impulsively, to paint the bedroom at the weekends, and it takes quite a few days to do it. And I hadn't realised just how much the things next to the bed were part of my system. So having any medication there, having having my charging leads there, having just having curtains up at the window. So suddenly everything sort of, oh God, it's the same space, but I'm having to put a lot more cognitive effort in to do basic things. And I think that's a really, interesting thing from a neuroscience point of view, that if you can put the dull and dreary stuff on automatic as much as possible, whether it's habits, reminders, systems, or flinging a load of stuff out so you're not having to wade through things, then you lose the cognitive load. So you lessen the cognitive load. And then your brain can soar, because, a minute ago I mentioned prison, which is bloody negative and it's, a bit depressing. But actually, when you look back at history and even people now, you look at pretty much anyone who's made a difference and they were neurodivergent. So Einstein, Da Vinci, Emma Watson has ADHD. She doesn't talk about it very much, but she's a massive advocate for women's equality, and justice sensitivity is a huge thing. It's not on the DSM-5, so you won't find it when you're assessed for ADHD. The assessment tends to focus on hyperactive little boys. Are you bouncing around the room? Well, no, I'm not, but my brain is. And so
DSM-5, sorry?
The DSM-5 is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, I've probably got that a bit wrong, of mental illnesses. So it's a description of these are the ways in which all these present. And if you get so many of them, you are diagnosed with ADHD.
Fantastic.
And interestingly, there are very few, or as I say, it tends to focus on children and the hyperactive side rather than the inattentive or impulsive side of ADHD.
Okay. And we touched briefly on it, but it's probably worth looking back on it. So ADHD and perimenopause and menopause. So, you've got a number of things going on there. Do you want to give your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that's not that well understood. I think in my own experience of it, it's almost as if it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. You've learned as girls often have what's called inattentive ADHD. So if you think of the little girl in the classroom who's maybe staring out the window, in her own world, not terribly focused, a bit forgetful, her room's messy, but she's very quiet, she keeps below the radar. Those girls have ADHD and they're not being picked up because we get conditioned about trying hard. I'm going to have to get you to remind me where
and the girls mask very well as well.
So girls mask really, really well, and we try and fit in, and we copy, so we mask what's going on. But there's, I think, a sense, and we try. I certainly tried very hard, and there's this weird dichotomy, and I can see it on my primary school report when I was 7, of loads of potential but not showing it. So there's this message of, you're really good, you've got lots of potential, but you're not doing well enough. And that's, I won't say on live LinkedIn what the word that springs to mind, but it messes with your head. It's very, very confusing of, well, hang on, am I bright or am I, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me if I'm being told I'm bright? So I'll just try harder. I'll keep people happy. I do as I'm told. And I think that builds up over the years into things like perfectionism, procrastination linked to perfectionism. I won't do it until it's right. I don't want to upset people. So I'll just, maybe try and second guess. You become almost a shapeshifter. So I'll fit in here and I'll fit in here. a lot of people with ADHD are very empathetic, but they're also very sensitive. So there's something called rejection sensitivity, which can end up as a lot of rumination of, oh, did I say the wrong thing? What are they thinking of me? And so a lot of this, you don't see the hyperactivity, although when I get on a flow, I start waving my arms around. But it's all up here. It never switches off.
And I was told, and correct me if it's different, but I was told that these women can mask, and then having children, it makes it almost easier to mask because there's always a distraction, and you've got sleep deprivation thrown in there as well in the early years. And then after that point, and the children start to grow up, and then they can hit perimenopause with a real bang almost, because it's like, okay, I'm getting old enough to know your own mind, or the women are getting old enough to know their own mind. They've been masking, and all these things you've been talking about. And then it's like, boom, basically.
Absolutely. And I think, menopause brings up all sorts of things, which are very confusing. So, brain fog. I was fortunate in that I didn't have hot flushes, but horrendous brain fog.
Yeah.
And forgetting words. So all of these things, so the estrogen drops and our executive functions suffer as a result of it. If we've been sort of living on the edge and coping up to then, and our default is just try harder, work longer hours, and keep everybody happy, it's a perfect storm. And, anxiety goes up, well-being goes down. We try and use the tools that we've always used, and it doesn't work anymore. And I think people, it's very frustrating that there's this, there are narratives going on about, there's, it's the latest bandwagon, people are using it as excuses. Trust me, I wouldn't not have ADHD, because I like the fact that it makes me a bit quirky and a bit bolshy, and not afraid to stand up for what I believe in.
Yeah.
But I could really do without, losing my phone 10 times a day.
Yeah.
And the self-doubt, which is really interesting actually to say that, because I don't have so much of that now. I've really worked on it since I left work, and I've really focused on, I think building my own business has made me realize it's not going to happen trying to get it right sitting at home in this room. The joy and the magic comes when I talk to people. So the fact that we met just on serendipity, and I decided at the start of this year I was going to say yes to things, and when you said, do you want to do a podcast with me,
I thought, did it off, didn't we? We were just
absolutely
finishing sentences, and I was like, wow, we've got some synergy here. And I've been looking for someone like you because I've been wanting to do a live with this sort of conversation. I'm interested in the executive functions that you spoke about. It might be good to talk about those in more detail for the benefit of any viewers, and potentially how that then affects financial decision making.
Absolutely. So if you think of executive functions, they're as the CEO of the brain. So it's all our logic. And something quite interesting happens actually is that they're all in the prefrontal cortex, which is the front of the brain. But the prefrontal cortex needs to have the limbic system well regulated in order to work properly. So that if we're under any sort of stress, you think of the limbic system, I do this the right way around, the limbic system sort of in the middle, and the prefrontal cortex is like my hand going against the door. And when we're under stress or anxious or any sort of pressure, an environment that doesn't feel psychologically safe, it's like the lid comes off. And it's really difficult to use the executive functions. Okay. So they're things like working memory. So holding things in mind. You were talking about your son before. You give him two or three instructions, and it's like, oh, I've lost track of it. Planning and prioritization, time management, impulsivity. So one of the big things of executive function is emotional control, but also impulse control. So it's really interesting because ADHD is an absolutely appalling name. Attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Don't call it a disorder, is the difference. And it's not a deficit of attention. It's an issue in regulating and directing attention, I think is a good way of putting it.
And we were talking about it in the context of a kind of a sort of village or a cultural unit, basically.
Yeah.
And these people like yourself would have been the hunters. And it's also a situation where if the village found a tree with a lot of fruit in, you wouldn't be there. You would have a bit of the fruit, and then you would be looking and saying, but there's another tree over there with more fruit.
Absolutely.
But absolutely. Some people within the village, more the kind of the gatherers and the farmers, who would be going, well, I'm going to get all the fruit off this tree first.
Yeah.
But your brain is already off with the other tree. And that's a benefit for the village, is to have a proportion of people like you.
Absolutely.
I don't think society is necessarily aligned really for people like you, and it starts in the classroom. And this, I do often rant about this, but you know, I was told my 4-year-old struggles to sit still in the classroom. He's not disruptive, but he does struggle to sit still. And I said to the teacher, I was like, well, just say he can stand up. And then it's like, yes, but we have rules and all this sort of what she probably doesn't realize, and there's things I don't realize because I haven't shadowed her in the classroom, is that yes, I'm a financial advisor. Her vision of a financial advisor is probably not somebody on a walking desk with a headset, either walking on a desk or wandering around the room. That probably isn't what her vision is in the classroom, having always been an employed teacher of what a financial advisor is and does. You know, so sitting down isn't massively key and a key part of my day. So there's this definite disconnect. We let children run around, and then we send them to school and say, and sit still.
Exactly. And then we prepare them for a workplace that with rules and you know, I think and I hope that we're becoming a lot more aware of the need to, not just for neurodivergent people, for all of us, to not have some stupid rules that say you sit at your desk, you know, and you have to work certain number of hours in a certain, exactly these, in this environment with no light, or it's not very healthy. And our brains don't work. I remember, you know, we don't work focused for hours at a time. Anyone doesn't.
No.
So I think it's very encouraging that, you know, organizations in some cases are starting to realize what's important. But I think one of the reasons I am passionate about doing what I do is to help people not only realize when they work best, but also really value what they bring, so that they can, you know, they're not on a back foot. I felt very much on a back foot and quite embarrassed and ashamed of the fact that I'm rubbish at admin. So, you know, coming back to finances, I have lost so much money in unclaimed expenses. Because when we're talking about admin, it's not just the stuff that I need to do for you, it's the stuff I need to do for myself. So executive functions, organization. So in terms of financial bookkeeping for organizations, if your systems are a mess, or if you don't keep track of receipts, and then, you know, they just build up, they're in a pile, and then it becomes a source of embarrassment and shame, and then it feels overwhelming, and then this sort of, your prefrontal cortex is well and truly flipped. You get into this, you know, this sort of cycle of I'm feeling like a failure for things, and my focus is on that rather than, hang on, what's the environment I work best in? How do I work best? How do I simplify it and put systems and support in place? And how do I, you know, get a community, or the sort of understanding of myself, so I know and I can spot. So today, I've had a really good week, but it doesn't feel as if it's Tuesday. It feels like it's Thursday, and I think some of that is I'm fairly shattered. So instead of going on to try and focus on something, I need to get outside. I need to do some exercise. I need to do anything that is, you know, moving my body and something different.
So are these the challenges that your typical client comes to you with, that you help them solve?
I think typical clients are, so I work with professionals and entrepreneurs who either have or think they have ADHD, and they think, hang on a minute, there's something not right here. I'm really busy and I'm not getting anywhere. I'm procrastinating. I'm overwhelmed. I'm not reaching my potential. I know what I should be doing. You know, I bought all the books. This has been pared down up here, this example. God, I bought a lot of books over the years. But something's blocking me, something's stopping me. And my own experience and working with other people seems to indicate that it's not enough just to understand what's going on. So I started understanding what was going on with me, and I tried harder to fix it. And then that didn't work. I understood what was going on, and I worked in an environment that worked. When my dad worked, I operated in an environment that helped. I still burnt out, because if you don't, it's like getting any piece of equipment. If you don't look after it, it's not going to work.
So are you able to manage yourself and your ADHD better with the fact that it's your own business, you know, you set your own agenda? Has that got better?
It's a really interesting one, Bella, because initially it was a real struggle, because I didn't know what to focus on, because that hyper focus and the sort of spread of, I could do this, this and this, but what is important was a real struggle. So I think talking to other people, getting I've worked with a coach myself to help clarify, no, these are, almost put that pipeline in place. So I know that I'm working on the right things, because being self-employed, you've got to figure that out for yourself. And
you've got sort of zero structure. And the example I was given the other day was, take Christopher Columbus, for example. He was the original entrepreneur. Hey, let's just sail off to the edge of the map. And you think, wow, you know, what I'm doing as a job, although I'm self-employed, has been done before. You know, there is an element of structure. And there are still days when you wake up and you think, okay, it's my job to do everything today, you know. But you think someone like Christopher Columbus, thinking, where are they going to fill up with water? No idea. Map doesn't tell them, you know. That is the original. That is your kind of worst case scenario, basically.
And bear in mind, probably a lot of people died of dehydration in those days as well.
Yeah, there'll be stories that wouldn't have been told. I think probably like myself, you know, you hear similar things being repeated in your clients, and it's cathartic for yourself as well. I find that with finance, you know, I'm certainly not perfect, and I hate the thought of people thinking I'm perfect in terms of finances as well, you know, and it's ongoing. I know probably know my faults better than some, but I just find it really reassuring to know that everybody goes through the same thing, and I find that really interesting.
I think that's, in terms of being validated and seen, and a sense of, okay, that other people struggle with this is really helpful. And then, you know, so there's the validation, but I have a lot more. Systems sounds the wrong word. I've realized, however much I initially pushed against structure is my best friend. So enough of a scaffold that I can then hyper focus on what I'm doing.
So you can be more creative because you have a structure. And do you mean a structure in terms of sort of segmentation of time? How do you manage that?
So I just little systems. So I have a written system where I put down today's focus on one page and any meetings on the other. I have multiple alarms on my iPhone which all say what they're for. So this morning, my husband said, well, what stage are you at now? I said, well, I don't know. I'm just doing the thing. I'll have to look at my phone to see what's coming next. Because I don't want to be remembering to, you know, remind a child to get up, cook breakfast, take medication. It's just dull. But my working memory is crap. So if I put that on, you know, my phone is my sub-brain. I don't need to remember that. And then I can flow. So what happens then is I've created the conditions where creativity can flourish. And you'll have experienced this yourself when you go for a walk or you're in the car or the shower. Suddenly those ideas just come to mind. But you can't force them. And I think that's where the benefit of running your own company is, that you can create those, but also it's recognizing that you need to create them, and it's not an indulgence, because
recognizing when you're being destructive because you're not creating them.
Exactly. When it feels off. And that's where the self-awareness is so important, that it sounds all fluffy, but actually when it feels hard and I'm not enjoying it, just there is no point sitting here and trying hard to finish it, because it'll make me feel worse, and it's slow and it's not my best work. Whereas if I go and do something else, and it might even be something as simple as washing up, hopefully it's a bit more interesting, gardening, but even something as practical as, as painting, it's something physical and it's got a sense of achievement with it. Then as I'm painting, the solution comes, because I'm not thinking about it. And then I rush back and write it all down. And then it flows. And I think a lot of it is about being in flow and creating the conditions.
And being self-employed would allow you that structure.
Absolutely.
I know I'm working this evening, so I made sure I had half an hour of just sitting down and reading a book at lunchtime today, because otherwise, I'm up at sort of 6 sorting out. Well, I exercise between 6 and 7, and then I start sorting the kids out at 7. And if I don't exercise then, it doesn't happen. Otherwise, I could be still going at sort of 7, 8 o'clock at night because I've had an evening meeting. So I have to be really disciplined and say, right, I'm going to read a book. But, all of this, again, is just so that as well, yes, we can manage ourselves today on a day-to-day basis, but I think how we manage ourselves, how we know ourselves, is a reflection of our finances. And I see that day in, day out with people. I can almost tell just from the initial conversation with someone at the beginning of a meeting, had nothing to do with finance, the Zoom connection or how I drove there. And I can almost start to tell at that point how, what I'm going to find in terms of the finances. And I find that absolutely fascinating.
And I think when you work with a financial advisor, to my mind, initially, my view of a financial advisor was somebody who literally just took you through the figures. And when you work with somebody who really gets you, it's a real partnership of what do you want to build in the future. And there's a lot you talked before about mindset in there, of, if you know that you have a tendency to be badly organized, well, and I saw on your LinkedIn the triangle in terms of your support network. If you've got somebody who's helping you with the organization of it, and you're more aware of what your triggers are. So if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling a bit fed up, is your tendency to overspend. So what else can you do instead? But thinking of it in advance, when you're not in the moment, it's a bit like eating chocolate, isn't it? So I think it's very similar neural pathways in terms of our finances as, overeating, overspending. Absolutely.
That explains a few things that I can't. No, that's really interesting. So tell us a bit more about your proposition then, and what your offer is. I think you wanted to talk about how you break things down.
So I realized recently, and I like to use sort of metaphor and to simplify things, because although there's all this stuff out there, and it suddenly occurred to me a few months ago that actually the way when I work with people, and I explained it to my husband, who's an engineer, and he got it. So I thought, I think I'm onto something here. In order to work with your brain, it's as if we've grown up with the wrong user manual. So I have a sort of user manual. If you've got something new, you open the box, the first thing it would tell you is what's in the box. What does it do? How does it work? What can you use it for? Which is all about self-awareness piece, strengths, challenges, values, understanding yourself. The second piece is, how do you look after it? Because if it's made of metal and you leave it in the rain, it will rust.
Yeah.
So you can't just ignore it. You've got to maintain it. You've got to look after it. You've got to, make sure that it's and all the things we've just been talking about there, rather than just trying to hammer work out of yourself, knowing what works. And then the third piece is all around strategies. So how do you get it to work? So how do you use it to best effect? And really, how do you, because there are so many strengths, and it sounds a bit braggy, doesn't it? But I think the difference, neurotypical brains tend to be pretty good at everything. If we're making a generalization, neurodivergent brains, whether it's autism, dyslexia, ADHD, are brilliant at some things and crap at others.
Outsource weaknesses.
Yeah, exactly. Outsource your weaknesses. And for the things that are, you do need to do, find strategies, find ways, develop skills of working with them, whether that's systems, organization, whatever it is. And I work with people on those three things, because one of them on their own isn't enough.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm sure that you as you with your work, you can think of, you learn something from one client, you think, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And then you can help and transfer it to another client. So
and I think what's been really helpful is that now I've got this sort of structure around it. I know where things go, because before, it's almost like big massive box of Lego. They're all useful, but how do I actually apply these? So depending on what somebody wants to focus on and what goals they want to work on, I can pull on a whole range of different things.
Fantastic. Really, really good. And obviously your contact details on LinkedIn, or people can DM you on LinkedIn.
People can DM me if they want to have a chat, talk through any goals they've got, or if they think they might want a bit more clarity. Very happy to chat. I can put my Calendly link in there as well, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think it's just so valuable. I mean, I talk about this triangle of support, which is in financial advice. If I don't have the clear information, which comes from the bookkeeper, but then, or the bookkeeper or accountant. I say bookkeeper because there's this whole thing about bookkeepers potentially being more available than the accountant. So having this relationship and actually potentially paying more to get regular updates in this relationship will help me to help people more. But the only kind of like icing I would sprinkle on the cake there, which would have destroyed my triangle, is that a coach is always worth paying for as well. It always seems like a bit of a luxury, but it's not. It's that whole thing. You put your own oxygen mask on first.
Absolutely.
And especially, an ADHD focused coach as well, with the understanding and the insights that you have. So thank you for your help.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's lovely talking to you.
I find these are good opportunities to actually have a good old chat. So I will end.
Absolutely.